How big is the company now?
We're just shy of 100. So 100 mark is coming really soon.
And I just saw on Twitter, like you just reached also like 50% female employees, right? Is that it?
That's true. Right? It's a really big milestone.
It is, and it's really rare. And it's 2016, and you were saying that like in progressive San Francisco and startup, like this would be like average, but it's really not, right?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that when we thought about doing we're planning a little bit of a blog post, a little news release, and it was sort of funny how to frame this because I don't think that many companies announce it because actually many companies don't reach it. And it's been something that we've been talking about for years at Lever. Right. It almost feels surreal to be at this point. And once you actually hit it, that actually just begins the journey because actually even just maintaining that continued investment.
And sort of it's not a milestone, right? You gotta own it. You gotta keep going, and you gotta maintain that. And it's also, I'm sure it goes into a lot more detail, because it's like people talk a lot about like getting that gender diversity also like in the engineering teams and in management roles and board seats and all that stuff. So it's kind of a never-ending quest. But you're right, like very few companies like reach that in my experience, and statistics also like seem to indicate that.
Yeah, so I think like the main reason that we're sort of banging the drum at all is actually because it took so much work from the whole team. Right. That for them, really, it's this huge accomplishment, huge announcement. And, honestly, I don't think that I really personally did it myself, or it wasn't sort of some grand leadership move. Right. It was really like the hard work and I think caring about it and all the little things that every single person, all 100 of us have kind of done.
Everything has to work, right? It's like you have to be behind it, like the board has to be behind it, and people recruiting has to kind of follow, and then you have to kind of get the pipeline and get everything kind of lining up that way. So yeah, maybe we can just kind of sit and kind of talk. But I'm kind of surprised, I guess, by we can do this. By like how difficult it is. And so do you feel like, there's many reasons why you can push for that kind of objective and kind of 50%, but do you feel like it's worth it, I guess? How would you explain it to people, like why do this? Because it seemed like such a big goal and it does require resources, so why do that push for diversity, right?
Yeah, I think for us, we probably have a lot easier than a lot of other technology companies because based on the industry that we work in, which is, of course, hiring and recruitment, for the people that we sell to and support and onboard, recruiters, hiring managers, really like companies that are thinking about how they should be growing, how they should be scaling. It actually makes good business sense for us to care about the same issues that are just challenging our industry. Right. So I think that we're fortunate, and then I think it makes a lot of sense to care about diversity because our audience, our customers care about diversity. But I think kind of like as a startup founder, as just sort of somebody who still has to lead, my team, I think it really matters because the people that come to work at your company, they actually are expecting more and more from the businesses and organizations they work for because how hard you work at your company is kind of, it makes up a huge part of your identity, and I think that people actually want to see the ethics of their businesses shine through. They want to actually see, the companies, the startups that they put so much work into, they actually want to see those companies meet the standards and the bar that they kind of want corporations to sort of hold themselves to. We're sort of the generation that grew up amidst, I'd say, corporate collapse. I remember being in middle school or something and hearing about all the, the Enrons and all the subsequent kind of failures. And I think people really want, the startups to offer a different path.
Yeah, they want that kind of culture, right, to represent like their own ideals, to drive for something bigger, right? Is that what you're saying in a way that, there's many kind of workplaces you can choose to work for that offer you maybe like a great like challenge if that's what you're going for, or salary or situation, benefits, but people now in our generation, they seem to look for, also a culture and a drive, right, that goes beyond just like making money and providing those things.
Yeah, I think put really simply, what makes a startup employee care more, stay later, work harder, it's meaning and the chance to have impact. And I think both of those are really served not just by having a diverse workforce, but also having an inclusive culture. You're going to have meaning if you can actually see the connection between how your business is run or the decisions that are made and sort of a moral true north. And you're going to feel like you have more impact if actually you're at an organization where it's not just one type of person or one style of speaking or one, particular, I guess, predominant way of working that excludes other types of impact.
Yeah, it just broadens your horizon, right, as a person spending, 8, 10, 12 hours in an office a day, right? So that makes a lot of sense. But I don't want to overshadow the first point as well that you're making, if I understand correctly, of like, it just adds value to have a workforce that represents like your user base, right? And so in a way, if you think about it from a technical angle, for example, if I understand correctly, what you're saying is the same way that would benefit you to have like, I don't know, server-side engineers and front-end engineers to kind of build like a full technology stack that people would use. On the other side, it kind of makes sense to have like, women and men and a bunch of different people kind of building your product if that's your intended audience.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think actually there's this huge, there's so many ways to define diversity. Right. And, of course, HR tends to have a lot of women in it. So gender is one dimension. But I also think like we've had to do a lot of work here to build up an understanding for how a technology company, when we're a software company, how kind of all the people who are technical here actually can service a whole kind of industry of people who consider themselves, frankly, non-technical, who consider themselves, maybe like a service organization inside of their company. And that's just so different from the profile of your typical, engineer that kind of becomes an entrepreneur.
Right.
And so actually, one thing that we found is really these sort of nebulous dimensions of how people can be different, their communication style, their work style, all that does also roll into how diversity can be a really powerful thing for, basically doing business better. So one thing that we introduced really early on at Lever, when we were basically like a team mostly of engineers, we had maybe like 2 designers, a couple generalists.
Right, the early days, yeah. Yeah,
the super early days. We were super focused on just shipping our MVP. We were really an R&D focused company. We started having all these customers to onboard, customers to support, people we were talking to. And we realized that like what made up Lever was a lot more than just building a product. Right. So we went from this period of really just being kind of this one product team to actually realizing there were all sorts of different components to what it took for us to succeed. And that led us to do this really great exercise as a team where, we sort of took our test and we got our results back and you find out what color you are. And your color really is about kind of defining your working style, that sort of thing. And I remember when we first did the test, everybody was blue, because blue is sort of like your software engineer kind of color. And I mean, we should actually walk if you want to see it. We actually like now every single hire, they take this test, they get the results back. It's a big part of our onboarding process.
Right.
And so now we've been really like filling in the circle.
Right.
And you actually really find that like, being able to have, yellow, which is sort of being outgoing, being kind of like somebody who's really a people person. Our sales team brought in all these yellows. We found that like actually being kind of a helper, a supporter, a coordinator. Yeah, I mean, this is sort of like kind of telling the story of what it takes to build a successful SaaS company. It's like we had to kind of build in all these different people with different strengths, different kind of dimensions. And really, when you look at this, it's not sliced on dimensions of gender or sliced on dimensions of race. So one of the big insights that we found in our journey is defining diversity. It ends up being something where you have to talk about difference. You have to be able to have language and toolkits to talk about what makes people different from another, how you define strengths and weaknesses, how you actually align resources towards work to be done. And it's really something where I think the conversation about diversity, it almost like gets in the way sometimes of actually talking about the differences between people.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I feel like, short of like not caring about diversity and not having any kind of will to go there, I feel like one of the first stumbling blocks I've seen personally is lack of ways to kind of digest the concept of it and to kind of discuss it and make progress on it, right?
I mean, the one thing that I think, like, it's great that people care about diversity in tech nowadays. What I don't want is for this to lead to a sort of whitewashing of the conversation. Right. I think like companies need more than ever the ability to talk about people and how human we are and how actually like hard it is for a group of people to self-organize and work together. And so, I mean, something that we found really at Lever is a huge part to making any progress, whether you're talking about like literally hiring people, just like even being able to scale our teams, or, kind of the more nebulous stuff, like, what skills we're really bringing to the table. I mean, what's always been helpful is just talking about it without fear. Right. Talking about being black at work, talking about being a woman in tech, and being able, I think, to, I don't know, like normalize that.
Yeah.
I remember I used to do a lot of panels about being kind of a female CEO,
Right.
being like a woman in tech, and I would go on stage, and when you had like conversations about diversity, people would be like almost afraid to name it.
Right.
They'd be afraid to like say, you know, the trigger words.
Yeah, people are always worried about like saying something wrong, right? Like holding an opinion that they're not supposed to have or not supposed to voice. Or,
Right.
And I think, yeah, we're still in that stage where, in startup land, at least the one that I've seen, it's a really tricky thing, right? So, beyond kind of finding that language and overcoming that block, right, of like being afraid to talk about it, what else have you seen that kind of helps in terms of like at least advancing the conversation and making kind of gains and driving more diversity, right, in the workplace?
Yeah. I mean, so I think step one is always going to be talk about it, because I mean, like, it actually does occur at that level.
Right.
I think any
it does
diversity
naturally
initiative,
yield stuff, I've seen, right? It's very funny, just talking about it, usually drives, I don't know, more awareness. It seems to drive more results. Has that been your experience too? To just talking about it seems to like yield some advancements.
Yeah, I mean, I think basically nothing you do down the road can mean anything unless it's something that's actually like an open and frequent discourse in the day-to-day. And I think so, yeah, making it a topic of concern. Mm-hmm. And of course, the best way to do that is top-down, but at Lever, actually, it happened bottoms-up.
Right.
We were maybe 10 people, right. And we hired our kind of most tenured engineer, actually. Her name is Rachel. She came into the company having worked at a number of startups where her experience as usually the only women, usually the only female software engineer, just led her to really want the next company that she joined to do it differently. Right. And when she tells the story today, nobody believes her, but she was really scared the first time that she actually decided at our weekly team meeting to make this a topic she wanted to bring up. And I remember that meeting, I remember that day where she sort of got up, she prepared all these slides to sort of basically educate us about the issue of diversity. And this is, back in 2013 when nobody was really talking about it, or it was still sort of something of a risk to be that person, to be the poster child of an issue, and to actually talk about it at work. Yeah. So I mean, of course, like, it was a happy ending at Lever. I think that risk that Rachel took snowballed into us caring about it from a really, really early stage. And I really attribute us starting to care about it early, starting to talk about it early, to all the things that happened later. So making it a topic of concern led to us to start thinking about building an inclusive culture.
Okay.
And, diversity is often talked about on its own, but I really think diversity and inclusion, kind of like the pair.
Makes sense.
And more than anything, I actually think the inverse, inclusion first, is really actually what's gotten us success here at Lever.
Well, it's really hard to force people to be together, right? And if you don't have I guess a welcoming environment, like, it's the first problem you're probably going to hit, right?
Yeah.
In trying to hire people that are not reflective of your current culture, your current makeup, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like scaling any other kind of business. I mean, would you build up a huge sales team without marketing? Would you build up a huge design team without engineers? Like, I think you have to sort of think about, of course, all the parts that contribute to the outcome and scale things in conjunction. So yes, building an inclusive culture, it's a huge thing that, I mean, even the largest organizations, the largest, most well-funded diversity initiatives at big tech companies, I mean, they miss that part. Right. And this for us in the early days was simple things. One, paying attention to how we talk to each other. Right. I think a lot's been made out of, is the term guys, something that is fair. And actually that wasn't a big deal for our team. What was actually a bigger deal was that the opposite of guys seemed to be girls. Mm. And as silly as that is, no women in tech identify as a girl. Right. And I mean, obviously, throw like a girl, run like a girl. This is a pejorative in kind of society. So I mean, one stupid thing that we did really early, but I think was a big signal to people, was we officially decided that you'd refer to your female colleagues as women. Mm-hmm. That's kind of awkward. I mean, I don't know if you've ever tried to change the way you casually express
We went
yourself.
through that in a company. It is tricky, right? Because it's so ingrained. Language is so ingrained in each of us, right? Mm-hmm. And particularly then in another layer in our culture, that I remember being in a company where everybody would say "you guys" all the time and not think about it. And that was actually in our case, something that was flagged as a problem by your own kind of company, and it went through a lot of things for us to find out the words, like how do you have this plural you, right, and without saying guys, and even if you don't mean anything, it doesn't mean that it doesn't impact people on the other side in some way. So
So that's a really, really small thing. I think the things that ended up being more important to do when you talk about breaking down building an inclusive culture, it was how we ran meetings. Actually just paying attention, looking at the status quo with like open eyes and asking ourselves, is this how we want to run efficient, effective meetings? Looking at how we made decisions. Was it the loudest person? Was it the person with the most data? Was it the person who would inherit the consequences of whatever decision was made? We looked at
to dive into that, right? I guess the other thing, maybe I'm jumping to conclusion, but is that different genders or different people have a different risk profile or different tolerance for that, or different willingness to go loud, or different willingness to spend time like doing data research or whatever. And so if your culture kind of drive decision in that particular way, you might be not as inclusive as you'd like of people of different backgrounds.
Well, I mean, at some dimension, like forget whether or not you're being inclusive, like you may just be making the wrong decision.
Right.
I think that if you have a dominant way of making decisions that's cultural, you're probably not going to be conscious about whether or not you're making a decision that's effective.
Right.
And I think actually a lot of building an inclusive culture, it's the goal is almost just to build a more effective business, and the byproduct is to be more self-aware, to be more kind of conscious of how, and then as a result, you're probably being more inclusive because you're not just letting the dominant knee-jerk reaction kind of be the way.
You're more aware, right?
Yeah, I think it's kind of the danger of all of the...
And that's good advice in general, right? Even if you're not worried about diversity, I've actually been in companies that just had no idea they were making decisions. Like they had some mental model of like, I think that's how we decide, but then in practice, that's not actually how decisions were being made.
You hear a lot of companies that are proud of the fact that they're a sales-led company or a product-led company or an engineering-led company. And I think all of those are just code words actually for making the dominant discourse at your company one particular function, which has, of course, its stereotypes or its baggage or whatever it is, at the exclusion of others. And so actually one of our values at Lever, we call it cross-functional empathy, XFE for short. And for us, that means that like Lever will never be a company that's dominated by one of our functions. That as we evolve, as we grow, there's always going to be one org that maybe needs to get lifted up by the others or is the most critical. But frankly, it takes kind of everybody here to do it. And that's the connection. People ask me all the time, why does diversity help you build a more successful business? And the answer is, we're not myopically focused on one function of the business. We're actually really, really aware that it's going to take sales, marketing, customer success, design, product management, engineering, recruiting, HR, leadership, management. It's going to take all these components to succeed. And I think as a business, if you're too quick to build your culture around one tentpole, you're actually, basically omitting cultural focus on evolving all these aspects of the business. So, I think like culture became a really big topic for startups, unsurprisingly 10, 20 years ago. And I think now it's just, it's just what you do. And I think now we're starting to see a more elevated discourse about culture that I think diversity is a big part of, which is, okay, so we have this great powerful tool called culture, but are we actually, still using like the equivalent of a Paleolithic hand axe? What's the next evolution of actually like, engineering, manipulating, evolving culture towards specific ends. And I think for a fast-growing startup that's going through a ton of evolutionary change, you really need a culture that actually effortlessly helps evolve all parts of the business. And that's where diversity and inclusion comes in.
Makes sense. And this is kind of an interesting aside, but like since we're on the topic of kind of culture in a broad sense even, how much do you feel like this is something that's top down versus bottoms up, or or even I have this kind of suspicion in my head, and I'm no domain expert at all, so feel free to rob me of this kind of a misconception that the fastest and best way to impact culture is actually recruiting. It's not to start with existing employees, but it's like in hiring different people and kind of molding kind of how you expand the company. And because the only way to move, and at least in my experience, is through like the people themselves. And so what's kind of been your experience being at the nexus of like, again, like a lot of deep thinking about culture and molding that, and also kind of being very involved in recruiting on multiple levels, about like the best way to kind of shape culture?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of unexplored mechanisms, but I can talk about recruiting at great length. Super passionate about it. Obviously, like we talk about it here on so many levels. Our product basically is the software that companies use to run their entire hiring process. And something back in the early days, I mean, I'm a designer by my background. And so my early days at Lever was all about user research and converting that into this product that would become Lever ATS and Lever Nurture. For us, really, what we saw with regards to recruiting at companies was that, I mean, you don't obviously go to college majoring in recruiting. A lot of people who are, thrown into helping with interviewing or, thrown into being a manager, they've never actually received a lot of like formal training. And actually, it's kind of the blind leading the blind because the talent landscape has changed so dramatically over the last even just like 5 years that a recruiter who's been in the industry for 20 years hasn't necessarily been equipped for today's, really intense competition for talent, for the competitive offers that are flying around in the tech industry, for being able to actually, go out there and not just like hire against growth goals, but also, I mean, try to focus on diversity at the same time. It's actually completely uncharted territory. And what we found really like made a difference for people when they were really, I guess, trying to be intentional about how they were building their culture was to invest a lot more in making their hiring more collaborative. I think as a founder, I mean, as a CEO, you've got a million things flying around. You've probably gotten advice from blogs and your VCs and all sorts of people telling you like hiring's really important. You need to spend a lot of time on hiring. But I mean, I meet entrepreneurs every day for whom this is just still surprising. And I think you're looking for anything you can get off your plate, anything you can hand off to somebody else. And I would say that people just have the exact opposite instincts when it comes to recruiting, because your instincts tell you, I need to hand this off. This isn't the most important thing I need to be doing. I should just give this to a recruiter and they can run with it. And actually the key to scaling culture, whether you're talking about going from 10 to 50 or whether you're talking about going from 1,000 to 10,000, across all of our customers, the answer is make hiring more collaborative. Have more people spend more of their time. Pull in your most senior time-strapped people to focus on this. Pull in the people that actually you trust the most. And open the doors. Make sure that people from day one, when they kind of come and show up on your team, that they're also thinking about hiring, that you're training new people to get involved, whether that's through interviewing or through referrals, whatever. The companies that we really succeed in not just hitting their growth goals, actually finding the people, but also scaling their culture and making a dent in diversity, they're companies that instead of siloing recruiting into a function, make it a part of the culture.
It seems like that would achieve like so much in terms of driving awareness of like just the existence of culture and the importance to think about it in every single employee.
It poses a lot of questions. It's like, we're going to interview someone for culture fit. What does culture fit mean?
What is even our culture?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like one funny thing that we decided to do in our small quest to help companies actually hire better for diversity is, you can't actually have a reason in Lever. When you mark someone as, I'm not hiring this person, you can't actually have a disposition reason that is culture fit. Our team pushes back. Our customer success team that's onboarding you will literally say,
that's probably
you shouldn't do that.
Flag,
and you should describe what it is that makes someone not a culture fit. And I think small details like that, whether it's a company that's actually asking themselves, like, how are we hiring? Like, what is our interview process? What are the things that make somebody a great fit here? To systemically, like, what are the reasons that show up in a drop-down menu when you're trying to disqualify someone? I think that full spectrum is so critical for asking the questions that an early stage company needs to be asking, for asking the questions that a founder or a CEO needs to be answering. I think like really when you talk about like cultural leadership, how you hire from 10 to 50 is the most defining thing that you're going to do as a founder with regards to culture that you will ever do in the entire scope of your career. So yeah, I mean, like, I think recruiting can be a huge multiplier, and not because it solves anything, but because it actually points to the questions that you need to be able to answer.
Yeah.
And we realized that we had a lot to learn, and I guess also decided at some point it was for the three founders that were still involved with the business, that it was kind of better to, the expression is better to be rich than king. In our case, we just really believed in the value proposition of what we were trying to build, and wanted to do everything in our power to raise more money, to invest more money in content and product, and build something that would be lasting and meaningful. And that was why we went the external CEO route.